Do you want company while you wait for your beast in the jungle? This is a No Fear podcast. We know what scares you.
I'm Matt.
I'm Mel.
And I'm Lisa.
And this is the No Fear Cast, the podcast where we dissect horror and all the things that scare us. This is episode 10 of season 5, and we are finally to the end of our watch through of Netflix's Haunting of Bly Manor. So, as I just said in our intro there, we are going to be discussing the final episode of Haunting of Bly Manor, the Netflix series that is loosely adapted from several of Henry James's short stories. And before I turn it over to Lisa, who, since she has been our novice throughout this, having watched every episode as we're doing this watch through, I just want to say that for me, this was kind of the episode that really did seal this series for me. I had kind of spent the previous episodes kind of on the fence as to, I mean, not whether or not I liked it, but whether or not I thought it was as good as the previous Haunting of Hill House adaptation. But this episode kind of knocked it out of the park for me. So I really enjoyed it. And I'm sure all three of us will have a lot to say. But I do want to, as we have been with all of these episodes centered around this series, kind of ask for your input, Lisa, your feedback, since Mel and I are rewatching this series and you're seeing it for the first time. Having finished the series, what was your thought of the episode and kind of maybe even the series as a whole?
Well, I'll start with this episode. I was excited to see what they were going to do with it because, I knew there was the framework story and I hadn't quite worked out. I mean, I had my theories on who the narrator was. I thought I had already picked out Owen in the wedding party. And I had my thoughts on who the bride and groom were, but I didn't know. So I was looking forward to seeing this episode. I was not prepared for all the emotions when I watched this episode. So I'll just go ahead and tell everybody that, when I watched it, I bawled. I thought a lot of things were really touching the way they did it. Overall, I really enjoyed it. I really don't know where to dive in. I guess we'll just start at the beginning with some of my thoughts. It started, it opened on Hannah where she was back in the room that we've seen her on, and the idea that she kind of accepts that she's a ghost at this point. And I found that really touching because her episode in particular had been so beautiful and so heartbreaking, her storyline. So I liked that it opened on her. It broke my heart a little bit that this was kind of the moment where she, I think, fully accepted the fact that she was dead and that she couldn't live a life beyond Bly. Because before she had been so desperate to try to hold on to even like something that she could have. But I also liked the idea that she realized she had to leave her kind of safe, comfortable space to go help her friends. So I appreciated that. And then we're back kind of in the real world of Bly where Danny is being still dragged and choked. I did note down that I felt bad for Danny at this point because this marked the third episode that she was still on the ground being dragged and choked by the lady in the lake, because there were so many flashbacks. I was just like, oh my gosh, we're still here in this moment of her being like dragged. So yeah, my thoughts, I will say this. A lot of action happened, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this too, but a lot of action happened really early in this episode. So like you have Hannah realizing she's a ghost and being determined to help her friends, even if it means like, you know, leaving that happy memory she's found herself in. You have Danny, who is now in danger of dying. You have Flora jumping in and saving her in I thought, a really lovely moment where she could have gotten away to go hide, but instead had the presence of mind and I guess the maturity to stand on the bed. And so Viola recognized her as her daughter. And it was, again, a really beautiful moment, but terrifying. And that's one of the things that I think I love about this show is how it can really take the horrific and the beautiful and mingle them together in the same moment. Because I think that the original Gothics novels tried to do that. You know, mix the beautiful and the sublime and the horrific kind of all together at once. And I thought this did a really good job, like especially in this moment where Viola sees her daughter, and of course we just had Viola's episode with episode 8, and so we saw her struggle through all these years of just really looking for one thing and the frustration that comes from not being able to have it. And so it was like wish fulfillment for her. You know, in this moment, she got exactly what she'd been looking for. And you kind of felt her completeness in that moment. But then at the same time, you recognize that now Danny has put herself in, Flora has put herself in danger for Danny's sake. And you know, so all of this is happening, and then you see Uncle Henry drive up, and that was a lovely moment too, because you think after seeing his episode, he had been wanting to have that connection with Flora, and he had been thinking about being at Bly, and he had been wanting to be at Bly, but he had not allowed himself to. So it was that one moment where he's kind of like, I'm going to go and actually show up for Flora in the way that I needed to all of this time. And then he just kind of dies. Like we find out later that he's not quite dead, but I thought, oh, here comes Uncle Henry to the rescue. And I actually wrote down, I was like, man, he turned ghost fast. Like that had to be one of the quickest moments in Bly of somebody just barely stepping foot in Bly and then suddenly becoming a ghost. But so I'm writing all this and I'm thinking, oh, all of this is happening really, really quickly. And it seemed to me to be tying up the entire series. And at one point, like I paused it and I thought, we were like 10 minutes into the episode. So that was kind of a nice moment for me of thinking, oh my gosh, where is this going to go? Because I think the nice thing for me is that this episode went beyond where I thought it would. Like I knew that somehow everything going on at Bly would be wrapped up. But I was not expecting it to go where it went. So, I mean, I know we've got a lot more to talk about in the episode, but I'm curious to hear, Matt and Mel, your thoughts.
I remember the first time I watched this particular episode, I ultimately loved it. And I think looking at the show as a whole, I think I've said this earlier in our series, I feel like I like it as much as The Haunting of Hill House. There are parts of it I like maybe a little more. But the first time I watched this episode, I was not expecting it to be tied up so quickly. So like you said, like Danny's being choked for like 3 episodes at this point. And I'm watching it and like, what's going to happen? And how disturbing is this going to be? And are they going to make it out? And, but it was really fast. And when it was like 15 minutes and it was done, I was like, okay, I paused just to see how much I had left in the episode, because I was like, surely this can't all be fixed right now. But then I continued to watch it. Of course, I was, got teary-eyed and I mean, it ended so well, and I think several ways. One of which is if you're thinking of it as a James short story or like Turn of the Screw, it's that Jamesian frame story that worked really well, and some of the themes that worked really well. I had started to have my suspicions about who the people were. I had my suspicions of who the people were at the wedding from the very beginning. So I wasn't totally shocked by how that went. I actually, a couple episodes before that, started thinking that the older character was Jamie based on the accent that was being the way that I mean, it sounds like an older Jamie if you let yourself go with that. So that didn't. I know some people. I saw some stuff online where people were like, "No way, and this can't be true, and these aren't the older characters." So that didn't bother me. It's a story, so the end kind of lets you know that it's a story, whether you believe it's the older characters and it was like real and changed or not or whatever. And we can talk about that. But yeah, the first time I saw it, I was just like, "Is this episode only 15 minutes long?" And then the rest of it was just so beautiful, and I think it never lost its like gothic aspect. I mean, I think the show is a gothic romance, which is a subgenre of horror. It's a part of horror. It's an influence on what we think of as horror, I guess. But it definitely keeps that theme. And yeah, it's just so beautiful. And it takes a lot of themes that the Haunting of Hill House was doing about loss and memory and story. And life, and it takes a lot of themes from James's work as well and just weaves them all together so well. I personally was shocked that Danny didn't die. I mean, Peter Quint was dead relatively quickly, and Danny gets drugged. Not like Peter Quint was grabbed at the top of the stairs and didn't even make it to the back bedroom. And Danny was fine, just gasping away the whole way across the front yard of the house or the estate, all the way through the foyer, all the way up the stairs, all the way into the bedroom. And then it finally seems like maybe she's dead. And then Flora pops out to try to save her. So yeah, I was surprised that Danny made it. I think there was a point where I was just like, well, Danny's gone. And I was surprised at how fast Henry died. But of course, he came back. But yeah, I guess those are my initial thoughts. I was like, wow, this just seems like it was fixed, like quote unquote, too quickly. Of course, it's not. And you have that kind of coming out of the dream and like going back into real life aspect of it that worked, I thought, pretty well. I'm trying to think if there's any other like first impressions I wanted to throw out there. I felt like Peter Quint got off too easily. But I loved how Hannah, even though she worked through her existential crisis and realized she was dead and could give up, went back to help them and didn't just stay in um, her solipsistic memories. So yeah, those were some of my impressions of the episode.
Well, Mel, you kind of stole some of my thunder there with Danny and her miraculous plot armor.
That's a good way to describe it.
Yeah, like that would have been my main criticism of that part of the episode. And like both of you, my initial impression was, wow, that was really fast. This episode is got more time left on it. What's going on here? And I liked where it went, but I think that was my one kind of quibble was exactly what you said, was everybody else that Viola barely even touched in some cases pretty much like fell over dead. Meanwhile, Danny has survived being dragged the length and breadth of the grounds, it seems like. And it just seemed it seemed inconsistent and just enough to kind of bother me because, well, like I said, plot armor. She's the hero who has to survive this so that we can continue with the rest of the story. But I mean, it sounds like I'm being pretty harsh with it, or I feel like I sound like I'm being harsh, but I mean, it doesn't diminish my overall enjoyment of the series as a whole on this episode. But yeah, that was definitely something that bothered me. But overall, like both of you said, I really did enjoy where it went for the rest of the series, or the rest of the episode, with following Jamie and Danny. I thought that was really poignant, and especially since it was kind of, you knew that there was this lingering shadow following them, at just kind of waiting to resurface. So there was that constant sort of bittersweet dread that was there. Like, here they are happy, but when's Viola? And that, yeah. So those are kind of my thumbnail sketch thoughts there.
Yeah, it I had some issues with Dani as well. I really liked what they did with her character, but I think my problem was, I think I loved the Hannah and Owen storyline so much. And for that to get wrapped up in like the first third of this episode, and then to focus, even though I liked the way they wrote it, I liked the way it played out the rest of the episode. I think I always was gonna want more of Hannah and Owen. Because I mean, I thought it was interesting the way they saved Flora, for instance, because as she's walking into the lake, and I just kept thinking, are they going to let, like, surely they're not going to let Flora die, you know? How are they going to get her out of this? And then Rebecca Jessel was there, and she's telling Flora that it's going to be okay. And then I realized that she wanted to tuck her away so she wouldn't feel it. And part of me thought, Rebecca wants to do that for Flora because Rebecca had to experience her own death. And that was so traumatic for her that she didn't want Flora to go with that, have to go through that. But then I thought, oh my gosh, like, you're a ghost. Is there nothing you can do to save this little girl? Like, do you have to just like help her die? Like, so to see Dani run up and figure out the way to save her, basically by inviting Viola in, by saying, it's you, it's me, it's us. And again, I liked that repetition of that. I don't know. It just, to me, I wasn't sure why Dani had that power to do that, if that makes sense. I'm glad she did. I'm glad Flora didn't die. I'm glad she got to save Flora. And I liked the way it played out. But that moment surprised me. I was like, oh, okay. I wasn't quite expecting that. Of course, when they made the moment, and this is when I really just started bawling, because Owen, while this is going on, is busy saving Uncle Henry and brings him back from the dead. And we realize that now that Dani has taken in Viola, that her gravity is released, which basically means all the ghosts are no longer bound to Bly. And when Hannah says the rest is just, and then she leaves, she's just gone, that moment broke me. In part because I thought it was such a nice callback to one of my favorite lines from Hill House, the rest is just confetti. But also because when I realized that in saving Flora and in taking in Viola, Dani had essentially erased Hannah. That destroyed me. So yeah, I mean, I can see what you're saying about like maybe Peter Quint got off a bit too easily. But at the same time, I was so busy sobbing over Hannah, I don't know if I thought that much at that point.
Yeah, I can understand that. And she's trying to tell Henry the stuff that she wanted to tell Owen. And Henry, I mean, this dude has just, he just decided to go back to the house and try to help his family after years of this terribleness. And he just died at the hand of a ghost. and he's just standing there as a ghost, like not knowing what's going on, watching someone try to resuscitate him and Flora possibly die. And Hannah's like, tell Owen this, this, and this. And I don't even know if did he know? I don't know. If it was me and I went through all that, I don't know if I would have been able to pass on messages. So that also kind of made me sad too, because I hope that he told Owen what she said, but it's clear after that there's a lot of misunderstanding about how whatever happened to Hannah happened. And I'm sure they're all confused about seeing her. It's never clear if they share enough information to really understand like what was going on, even, which I thought was interesting for a ghost story. You know, you can't just necessarily pin everything down. But yeah, I just thought Peter Quint popping out of Miles and being like, Miles, I'm so sorry. Like, he did not have some great epiphany as to how evil and abusive he was being. I don't think it's just like he can't do his plan now, so he's going away. Because like 5 minutes before that, he's yelling at Jessel about how she could have been free in Flora's body, but she's letting the vessel die. Like, I was pretty mad at him at that point. So yeah, but I get it. I get being so focused on the loss of Hannah, because it is sad. I mean, we're mourning her death a second time, which is pretty horrifying. And she is the ghost that had actual like growth and characterization and relationships with other characters after death, as opposed to the other ones who basically only interact with Flora. So I think that made it more poignant as well. Jessel trying to take on Flora's death. The first time I saw it, I was like, why don't you try to do something to really help instead of this? This is kind of pathetic. But then the more I thought about it, now that I've seen it, this is my third time, I think. Maybe fourth. Hannah tries, and Hannah's a ghost, and Viola just goes right through her, and it doesn't look very pleasant. So I'm wondering if Jessel saw that, or Jessel knows that that's a possibility. And so maybe she feels like the only thing she can do is to help Flora not experience death. But yeah, I was kind of like, let's try to do something else. And I thought it was interesting that Danny even does the "it's you, it's me, it's us," because I don't think she understands at the moment when she yells that out even what she's doing. I think she just almost died, and this Flora's about to die. Flora's Miss Jessel at that point, which Flora just looks shocked when she's doing the "it's you, it's me, it's us." I'm sure Jessel is like, "What the heck are you doing?" And it works, but it's only because Danny heard Jessel and Quint saying it. I don't think she has she's just grasping at anything that will save the kids. Saving the kids is her ultimate goal, just like the governess in Turn of the Screw. And so that endeared Danny to me even more, because I don't even think she fully 100% understood the risk of what she was doing. And I think if that hadn't worked, she would have probably plunged into the lake, like trying to save Flora to the very end, because I don't think she understood that Jessel was inside Flora at that point. So yeah, I don't know. Now that I'm talking about it, I'm like, there's like 50, 60 different things all happening at once. I think you have to watch the episode several times to even get all the nuances that are happening. And that's just in the first 10 to 15 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, all of this, and that's why I was so confused about this episode, because all of this is happening and I kept pausing it and looking at the time and watching it tick by, and I was like, where are they going with this episode? Like, all the ghosts are already dispersed. The children have been saved. Now, we know Uncle Henry's saved, so they're going to be okay. I was at that point really confused, although, I was still devastated at that point. And I think you're right. The reading of Danny is that Danny was probably so confused still about everything that's going on, and she was doing anything she could to save Flora at that point. And she knew that would manipulate. She knew that phrase would manipulate ghosts. I don't. She probably. I'd like to go back and watch it, because now I'm thinking, she didn't even really realize that there were ghosts until that moment in the attic, right? Where Quint and Jessel tried to take over the children's bodies. I guess, and do take over the children's bodies.
Yeah, she
Um,
almost sees a little boy ghost when he's moving the dolls in the dollhouse, but I don't think she actually knows they're ghosts until she sees Jessel on Flora's bed and then goes to the attic.
so for the living characters in this moment, Henry doesn't know that there are ghosts. He has memories of ghosts from his childhood, but we talked about that in another episode where I think he thinks it was a figment of his imagination or like an imaginary friend, or something along those lines. Yeah, I don't think he recognizes the fact that Bly is as haunted as it is. And Owen didn't. He never had any real interaction. So all of the living people, I feel like for this being a ghost story, all of the living people really only found the ghost at the very end, even though they'd been interacting with ghosts the entire time, which is kind of fascinating the way that played out. But the rest of the episode ended up being about Danny, really, because, and I did think that this was a really lovely, this was a lovely storyline. And I thought that it was a nice continuation of the themes that we've seen. So Danny and Jamie get to leave together. Obviously, once everything is over and done with, everybody kind of goes their own way and they leave Bly. And Bly is now like a happy place again. Because there's no, Viola and her gravity aren't there anymore. So it's a nice place. But Henry takes the two children. I think they go to America. Danny and Jamie leave and kind of start their life together. And then Owen goes and finally he's able to open the restaurant that he's always wanted to open, which I'm sure we will talk about that at some point. But I just want to go ahead and say the fact that his was a better place. That was the other part that I just lost it and started sobbing again. Yeah, I thought that was a nice touch. But so we find out that Danny is now holding Viola in, and she doesn't really know what that means, except that she can feel her, I think, at first. And they continued that mirror theme that it had been particularly with Danny this whole time, but Danny kept getting, first she was seeing distorted versions of herself. Like there was that one scene in the diner where there's a chrome napkin holder and you see kind of the distorted Danny. And eventually she starts seeing Viola in the reflection. She sees Viola in like windows. She sees Viola in water. And I thought that was really lovely because it was like a metaphor for trauma and like what she has held on to and what she has had to carry with her leaving Bly. I also found it really devastating too, because Danny had worked so hard to get rid of her first ghost. She had come to Bly carrying her own grief and guilt, and she had worked hard to get past it. And then now she had this new life with Jamie, but she was carrying this now. And so yeah, I did think it was nice. I liked the way they did that. Although I even noted at one point, I think by the time they went to go see Owen's restaurant, and it was right after Danny had proposed with the ring, because she knows she's losing time, or her kind of time is running out, and eventually Viola is going to win. I noted at one point, it was only like halfway through the episode. So at that point I was like, where are they going with this? I mean, this really, I thought they played it out well, because as much as I'd been kind of anticipating the end, there was a lot that I didn't see coming with that. I did like the relationship between Danny and Jamie too, because Danny had sacrificed so much, and especially when they were with Owen and he gives the update about the kids not remembering anything about Bly. And I can't remember who it was, but I think it was Danny who said something along the lines of, well, do you think their uncle will ever tell them what happened so that they can remember? And Owen says something along the lines of, like, would you want them to remember? And that kind of hit me too, where I was like, oh, she's going through all this, she's carrying all this. And even though she did it for them, and I'm sure she would do it for them again, I think it kind of stung that they didn't recognize it. Like they didn't remember it. So yeah, I don't know. I did like that relationship. And I liked that Jamie at one point said, she makes it clear she's going to stay with Danny and kind of stick with her. But she said a line that I wrote down. If you can't feel anything, then I'll feel everything for the both of us, which I thought was really lovely. I'm not normally sappy, but I started crying at that too. I don't know why. This is an emotional episode.
It is. And in some ways, that line kind of made me feel almost like she was Sam to Danny's Frodo. Like, I can't experience what you're carrying. I can't carry the ring myself, but I can carry you. So if you can't feel anything, I'll feel everything for you. And I would argue that Sam and Frodo, even if they were not in an actual like homosexual relationship, they definitely had a very strong and enduring love for one another that I think is very, I would say, similar to Danny and Jamie in that regard. But I like what you said about the mirror and the trauma as well. That was something that I had kind of noticed and was thinking along those lines as well, that it's almost like too that it's those quiet moments when she's kind of slightly still to that the trauma starts to come back up to the surface, when she's alone in the bathroom and looking in the sink or in the bathtub or those sorts of, I mean, it's not the only times that she sees it, but those seem to be the biggest times for her. And I mean, I think, that tends to be the case for most people who have some sort of trauma like that, where you can fill your day with things and busy your mind, but when you do have those quiet moments, that's when it kind of seeps up through the cracks and forces you to remember that it's there.
Yeah, and I think the fact that she sees it in her reflection too also plays with the fact that, going with that this has become like part of her. It's become part of her identity, and it doesn't matter if she tries to forget it or repress it, that it's still going to come out at some point. And I can see too, Lisa, how it'd be hard if you realize that everybody else who had this experience with you, well, didn't have it quite the same way you did, is forgetting. You don't want them to experience it, but also, I mean, that's another thing with the story too, is that we've been told is the idea of being forgotten. And this thing that happened at Bly, Hannah is being forgotten by the kids. They barely recognize her when they see her picture, and the kids don't seem to, remember too much about Danny and Jamie. And it's almost like this accelerated forgetting that we saw with Viola, that I think is also kind of painful, even though you don't want the children to be like re-traumatized. The other thing I thought was interesting too is Viola. I think we talked about this last time. Viola is a very sympathetic character. I'm not trying to, say that she's like an awful person or something. I think we talked about how complicated she was in our last episode, how she changed with her illness. But she was a force of nature, I mean, she was like, God made me to be this way and make these decisions and live forever if I want and own Bly if I want and do what I want. And she's a singular, very assertive, powerful voice. a person who, I mean, is doing what she does for herself, even if she does have a true love for her husband and her daughter. And we also talked a little bit about how possession gets mixed up a little bit in Viola's love too. Like, these are like my people, my husband, my daughter. It doesn't matter if I'm dead. I still want to have control over them. I'm even giving my possessions to my daughter. Like, there's this idea of assertiveness and control that's almost too much or to an extreme, to the point that that feeds her rage and her anger and her hurt and pain, that causes her to become who she is. And Danny, from the very beginning of the show, has been positioned as a person who doesn't really understand possessive love and talks about how love isn't ownership, or love isn't this, or love isn't that. And I thought it was interesting that she takes on Viola and everything that Viola is, and she kind of vanquishes her in the end, because she becomes a lady of the lake, but she doesn't have those same emotions or those same feelings because of the relationships that she had with others. And I thought that was interesting as well, like the grounding of the relationships that she had. I teared up and kind of cried a little bit every time they talked about taking things one day at a time, because you don't have to go through an intense supernatural horror and be possessed by a lady from the lake to know that when you're with a close family member, close friend, or significant other, that at any time that can be taken from you. Viola may rush that and make it more painful and harsher reality, but it's a reality nonetheless. And so just that microcosm of knowing that the person you love could be taken from you or leave or whatever at any moment, I think added another painful aspect to it as well. And that was also something that the Lady of the Lake couldn't handle, because she just didn't want to lose those things. So I thought it was interesting that Danny and Viola became such kind of, they had their similarities, but they were also different enough that it made perfect sense at the end that Danny would take her on and kind of, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, calm her presence, maybe. I don't know, because they're a mix of the two sides of it. And I think Danny would have been a way different person at the end and maybe made different choices had she not had the grounding of Jamie's love and Owen's friendship.
Yeah. And I think it was kind of the way it was all tied together that for me, I was really pleased with the storyline the way it was, even though I still think I connected with Hannah and Owen's storyline more. When I saw the way it all played out, I'm with you, Mel. I was like, oh, okay, this makes sense, because the only person who really could take on Viola was Danny. Even though, like we talked about, I don't think Danny really knew what she was doing. She was just trying to save Flora. But she became that, I mean, she was that force of nature, right? She was that was her, like, I'm going to do everything I can in this moment to save this girl. And so she was she had that same type of gravity, I think, that Viola had. And I like the way you put it, where she had the love of Jamie and the friendship of Owen to kind of balance her there. I also liked, I wish I had written it down. It was when Danny, she finally realizes that her moment is here and she leaves. And Jamie wakes up in the bed alone and finds the note. And she goes straight to Bly because, that's where Danny is. And so Danny is I guess now the Lady of the Lake, but there was some line that said something along the lines of, because it was Danny, nobody would ever be taken again at Bly. And so I thought that was nice, because I thought Viola's back, but Danny's there, and Danny is the counter force to Viola. We haven't mentioned it, but I also like that detail that after everything that happened at Bly, Danny's eye color changed, where she had one brown eye, one blue eye. which I guess was indicative of Viola being in her. But I think it also showed how they were kind of, like you said, the two sides of the same coin. And so that it did have to be Danny to take her down, because I don't think anybody else could have. Um, so I did like that. I mean, it was a heartbreaking end. It was a really heartbreaking end. I was heartbroken, and then of course we get to watch Jamie, who we find out is the she's the narrator, right? Which that makes sense to me. I think both actors did a good job of having the same accent. Like, you could definitely hear it, like you said, Mel. But just the fact that she was leaving doors cracked and looking in water, just hoping for like a brief glimpse of Danny, I thought was really beautiful. It goes back to what the very, very first episode at the beginning of the framework story, when the narrator is talking about kind of I don't know if it's the narrator. I can't remember now. I'm gonna have to go back and watch it. But somebody is talking about kind of the nature of love, and it's like one of the things about love is that it's going to have an end, and that if you're lucky enough, that end comes when you're both of old age. And I just thought, that seems like such a depressing thought, but at the same time a really beautiful one, because we've seen in the course of this whole show like several really great love stories, even though they ended, they were still beautiful love stories. So I don't know, it was heartbreaking, but I liked it. I liked it.
I had not noticed her eye color changing, and I've watched this episode a few times. That is a good catch.
Oh yeah, I paused it. It was at some point where they were in the kitchen, I think, and I was like, has she had that the whole series, and I'm just now noticing? But yeah, one of her eyes was a different color. I'm sure there are more details like that throughout. I need to go and watch, because I'm sure I missed a lot of them.
Oh,
yeah, I hadn't noticed it either. And before you got on the call, before we started recording, when it was just Mel and I, we were talking about that, how neither one of us had noticed the eye color thing. So I was like, wow, that's very, very good viewing, especially for your first viewing.
I know. Now I got to watch the whole thing again. I just want to point out one thing, and this is going to seem like a plot point, I guess, but one of the things that really got me this time around is just how long Danny waits too, because she is the only one who knows how bad this is, that she's got Viola in her. Like, I mean, she can explain it to Jamie, but Jamie's not necessarily experiencing it. Jamie and Owen got there so late because of their quote unquote bad dream. They didn't quite know what was going on. It's when she wakes up and realizes that she was about to kill Jamie that she leaves. And again, that's pure Danny, right? Like, she doesn't want to hurt anybody, and she only leaves for Jamie's protection. And I thought that was interesting too. Like, all of her reasoning is her connections to other people. It's completely like anti Viola, basically. And I thought that was interesting. She could have gone back to Bly earlier than that, when she first started to not feel anything and was losing time and whatever. But she loves Jamie enough that she stays until the very last possible moment. Now, I mean, she could have accidentally killed Jamie, but I thought that was an interesting, I don't know why it struck me more this time around watching it than maybe it did like the first time around. It's just how long she waits, because you see that kind of development. Things are really, really bad, and Jamie doesn't fully get it before, Danny leaves. And I don't know, it's just, there was something touching about that as well.
Yeah, because it could have been a different type of relationship. Like, if Because in the beginning, or even in the middle, where Danny says, I can't feel anything. She says, I'm so tired. Like she feels herself kind of fading away. It could have been where they portrayed the relationship as Jamie was just holding on to Danny as long as she could. You know what I mean? Like she was just trying to keep her there with her as long as she could. But because of the way it was written and the way it kind of played out, yeah, it was actually Danny who was the one who was holding on as long as she could to get that extra time. And that's, I don't know, that's nice. It's for such a violent ghost story that we just watched. And for a story that portrayed some really terrible relationships, you know, I mean, I'm especially thinking of Peter Quint. I will still never get over him. And what he did to Rebecca Jessel, but I think that was a really nice look at relationships. You know, that you are with each other as long as you possibly can, and you hold on to each other as long as you possibly can, with the caveat that you're not hurting each other. And that, I don't know, it was a nice sentiment to see play out. So I really did like their relationship a lot. And I really liked the way it was done. I'm glad they got their flower shop, and I'm glad they got their civil union. I thought it was nice to see them happy for moments.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, just a few moments. I don't know. It's not a huge amount of the episode, but you see their relationship deepen and develop in ways that I think we might have mentioned in earlier episodes. We didn't feel like we were getting enough development, but just, yeah, it worked really well in this last episode.
It did. Well, and I think that's probably why I felt closer to Hannah and Owen, because we saw their relationship develop, because we were in Hannah's head. So we saw like the full force of her feelings. We saw their relationship grow. We saw what could have been with their relationship, but we didn't get that with Danny and Jamie because they were at the beginning of their relationship. They had practically just met. You know, I think up until that point, they had only been on their first date to go see the Moonflower, right? So yeah, I mean, I liked that we got to see pretty much their entire relationship like develop and deepen, like you said, Mel, over the course of this episode. And it worked really well. I thought it was beautiful. I don't know. I feel like we should talk about the actual, like the end cap to this, the actual, when we see we're back at the wedding that we started at. And so we're back with the narrator kind of sitting there. She makes the joke that it was, you know, she's like, I told you it was a long story. And everybody looks a little shell-shocked when it pans around the room. And at that point, I was like, oh, okay, so that's definitely Jamie. That's definitely Owen, which I had kind of suspected. And I had wondered if the bride was Flora, but the American accent was throwing me off in the beginning. Although now I guess that's explained because she had gone to America at such a young age that she probably would have one. And there's the lovely line again. It's not a ghost story. It's a love story. But I want to get your guys' thoughts on when one of the other people there says, if I go to England and I go to Bly Manor, will there be ghosts there? Like, she's essentially asking, did you tell me a true story? And she says, if you go to England, you won't find Bly, or there's no place with the name of Bly. So was she changing details in this? Are we to believe that she told a true story, but she changed details to protect Flora? Or is it, I don't know, what happened there? Like with that little line threw me off a little bit, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
That's how I took it, was that she was changing it just slightly enough, maybe with the name of the place and maybe a few other small details, so that, well, like we had talked earlier about how Danny was not going to tell Flora and Miles, like not make them remember because they had forgotten, to let them keep that innocence. And that's how I read it, was that she was doing that to help keep that going. Maybe plant the seed of remembrance as a possibility, but not actually say, "Hey, this happened to you guys," you know. But that was my take on it.
I can see that. This time around watching it, I can't remember exactly what was said because I didn't write it down. But when Flora is getting ready to go to bed, she's like, my middle name's Flora. And then she says, I thought in the beginning when you started the story, because the name you gave the place, that it was about this place and the like Flora like started to kind of remember. And so that got me thinking, was it really called Bly? But she just told that woman it wasn't because she didn't want her going there. I don't know. It was like it went back and forth really quickly. I got to watch it again and look more carefully. But I was noticing that this last time, like Flora says something about the name of the place as if that jogged her memory somehow. So I don't. Maybe Bly is like part of the name of the real place. I don't know. Um, One thing that I thought of is ghost stories are notoriously ambiguous, and a lot of ghost stories of the time that Henry James was writing would be these weird things like, this person told me the story, but they changed this, so they changed that. I wondered if it was playing off of that idea. There's also the idea too. I want to say I've read ghost stories where there's like an audience as a frame story, and they say, "Well, if you go there at this time, you'll see this." And I wonder if it was playing with that. But I agree with Matt that practically, I think she was changing the names to protect the innocents, and using some misdirection so as not to completely make Miles and Flora go through it again. Though I feel like she was walking a wire there, because enough of what she was telling them was stuff that they had experienced, supposedly, that maybe they would have started to remember. I don't know. Maybe as now that they're adults, that's okay. I don't know. Maybe she was trying to connect with Owen and Henry again because they're the only ones who can remember that all this happened.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there were a lot of meaningful glances exchanged between her and Owen. So, yeah, at first I thought, I was like, oh, she has to be changing details. Like, I think we're supposed to know that, like, maybe even none of the names are the same, that Danny's name isn't really Danny or whatever. And that she was changing the names, like you said, to protect the innocent and to, just to protect Flora and Miles, because it sounds like they have a very lovely life and she didn't want to ruin that. But then she also used the name Flora, and that's when the bride-to-be says, my middle name is Flora, but you couldn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, oh, well, if she is telling this story and changing details to protect her, then I would have thought she would have used a different name completely. And so you're right, when she uses the name Flora, it made me wonder if she isn't hoping that, I don't think she wants them to re-experience the trauma, but I think part of what Jamie is now carrying is that she wants people to remember the love of her life. Like, she's the one carrying Danny's memory. She's the one constantly looking for Danny, everywhere. Just hoping for that, like, little connection. And I think it's got to be painful because I think part of her wants, like, looks at Flora and thinks, I not only want you to remember Danny, but I want you to remember that she sacrificed herself for you. You
Yeah,
know?
that's it. I would
Yeah.
say that yeah, she doesn't just want them to remember Danny, but the sacrifice that Danny made. Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, Danny would still be there, right? If she didn't take on Viola. So,
And she knows that if they forget, then Danny's going to look like Viola. I mean, yeah,
ugh,
it's extremely painful.
it is.
I
Yeah,
like I'm sorry. I just liked the little almost like fairy tale gesture she did because she called herself the gardener a lot in the story. The gardener, the au pair, the cook, and
yeah,
like she didn't even use their names a lot even. So it was very much like this almost like fairy tale type story, but it's real.
yeah, it's very real. It's very real to her. Yeah. No, I was just gonna say that is when she said something. I think when she was talking to the person who asked if Bly was basically asking if Bly was a real place, and she said, "Will you find ghosts there?" And she said, "Well, if you do happen to find it, you will find ghosts." And I don't know, that is heartbreaking to think that that's Danny's future now. That even though Bly isn't going to be the same, like people aren't going to be taken in the way. It's not going to be this like horrible place more. That she's going to still become kind of the faceless ghost that's always laying in the lake. I don't know. It was very, but then again, she's not, because the episode ended the same way it began, in the hotel room with the chair, right? And she goes to sit down in the chair to fall asleep, and we see the hand on her shoulder, which that was the other part. I cried at the end of this when I saw the wedding reception, and she was watching everybody, and then she was seeing them as they were back in Bly. That got me. I cried then, and then I cried when I saw the hand on the shoulder, because I just thought that was lovely, because I thought Danny is, as long as Jamie is there, Danny is there, right? So Danny's not going to be that faceless ghost as long as Jamie's still there looking for her. And a part of Danny is always, I think, going to be with Jamie, which I don't know. That was just a really lovely way to end it. So I liked it.
So, since we're getting, I mean, we've reached the end of the episode, and we're definitely at the end of the series. I kind of wanted to see what everyone's final thoughts were on the series as a whole. I'll say this, like you, the hand on the shoulder really got me at the end. That both times watching this, both the first time and the time for this rewatch or watch through, whatever we want to call this, that we're doing for the podcast. I know after I finished watching it, and I think Mel finished watching it a day or so after I did the first time, we texted back and forth a little bit about it. And one thing that I keep coming back to and thinking is, well, which do I like better, Hill House or Bly Manor? And I mean, in some ways that's, like saying pick your favorite album or what's your favorite book or something like that. I mean, it's impossible to answer question, because I really like both of them in very different ways. I'll say, I think one thing that I loved about Hill House in particular was the episode that took place practically in one shot, and also had that shot where the camera revolves around and goes from showing the kids as kids to the kids as adults. Like, that was such a gut punch to me every time I see it, and also so visually striking that I felt a little let down that there was nothing like with the cinematography like that in Bly Manor. But if you're just comparing story, I don't know. It's a tough call for me. And like I said at the very beginning of this episode, after watching this last episode, that really did bring the whole show's estimation up, in my opinion, because it really was it was not just a good ending and a good story, but I think it was almost the right ending, if that makes sense.
No, I agree. I think it ended, I mean, practically perfectly. Yeah, I don't know if I can pick a favorite between the two because I like Hill House for maybe slightly different things than I like Bly Manor. Um, I really enjoyed Bly Manor though. I mean, as a person who likes ghost stories, I felt like Bly Manor was a fantastically done um like love story to the gothic romance and the ghost story. It played on all the tropes, but in really interesting ways. And the things that I loved about The Haunting of Hill House were the ideas of memory and story, and the episode when Nell is talking to them, and this idea of loss and trauma and all of those things. And I felt like they were continued, and maybe even they delved deeper into them in Bly Manor in really interesting ways, that are so human and so, I don't know, like gut punch is the only thing I can think of. There's just these moments where you're like, yeah, that is that is what that is like or what that feels like. Um and yeah, I don't know. I feel like in some ways Hannah's character might have really gotten to me in a way that maybe characters in Hill House didn't, if that makes sense. But then at the same time, I find myself really drawn to the story of Danny and Jamie as that gets more developed. I still feel like Jessel wasn't fully developed, and I still find Peter Quint to be a horrible person, but that doesn't stop my enjoyment of the show. I don't know. What do you think, Lisa? Because you watched all this through for the first time.
I mean, yeah, I will echo everything that both of you have said. I don't know. To me, the Hill House and Bly Manor are two very different shows. So there were things that I absolutely adored about Hill House. Matt, you named almost all of them, so I won't rehash them. I think Hill House worked as a horror story a lot better. There were a lot of genuinely frightening moments for me in Hill House. Bly Manor, I think I was more intrigued by the ghosts than I was scared by them. But I also agree with the assessment in the last episode of this is not a ghost story, it's a love story. And I mean, we knew going in that it was a gothic romance. And so it's just a different show. I really loved the way themes of trauma and family were played out in this season in particular. And I'm glad that they kept Peter Quint a villain. Just, I mean, in the book, he's so bad that I liked that a whole lot. I'm like you, Mel. I wish Rebecca's character had gotten a bit more. I wish we'd gotten more of her backstory. I wish she'd been fleshed out a little bit more. I wish we could have gotten to know her a little bit before Quint really, got a grip on her. But that being said, I love, I mean, all the other characters that are just so good. I feel like, this one was fun given that it took into account so much of Henry James's work as a whole too. I felt almost like a little James detective looking and being like, oh, I know what story that's from. So that was fun. Yeah, they're very different shows. It's hard for me to say which one I enjoyed better. Having watched this, I may be leaning towards Bly a little bit. But I have a feeling that if I were to go back and rewatch Hill House, then I would suddenly be like, this is my favorite. So, Yeah, I guess it's just whether I'm in the mood for a horror story or a gothic romance, but I'll happily watch either one again. Mike Flanagan, he knows how to tell a story. And he knows how to, I think, adapt things in a really unique way too, which I really enjoy seeing. Um, well, I know we've been going along with this. It's taken us a while to watch. It's taken me a while to watch all of Bly, but I'm very happy that I did. As we've done this, we always invite our listeners to tell us what they think. So I'd love to know which one you think is better, Hill House or Bly Manor. We're at No Fear Cast on Twitter and Instagram. We also have a Facebook page. If you'd like to contact us by email, you can at nofearcast@gmail.com. If you love what we're doing, consider supporting us on Patreon and get access to exclusive content. We completely understand if you don't have the funds to do that. We're very grateful for all of our patrons because they help keep this show running. But we also recognize that these are difficult times for a lot of people. If you can't do that, consider maybe telling a friend, because just that word of mouth really helps us. Or, just simply rate and review us. So whatever podcast app you listen to us on, just open it up, leave a rating, leave a review, because that really does help with the algorithm. It helps other listeners find us. Thanks again for listening. We will be back in 2 weeks with a brand new episode.